Hey everyone, welcome back to the Randy Forcier podcast. Thanks so much for watching. Really excited about my guest today. It's Jeremy Ray. Jeremy is the superintendent of the Biddeford, Saco, and Dayton school departments. Really appreciate him making some time to talk. We had a great conversation about some of his accomplishments in the past 11 years, some of the challenges he's faced and continues to face, and some of the things he's really excited about moving forward. So it was a great talk. Full disclosure, I am a member of the Biddeford School Committee. So some of these things are things that I've had direct involvement with, and I do have a relationship with him in that sense. So please keep that in mind. So before we get to the conversation, I do have another favor to ask. If you could, please like the Randy Forcier podcast on Facebook and subscribe to the pod on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. Would really appreciate it. So thanks and enjoy the pod. All right, I'm here with Jeremy Ray, the superintendent of Biddeford, Dayton, and Saco Schools. How you doing?
Hey, Randy. How are you?
Oh, good. Thanks for joining me today.
You're welcome.
I wanted to go over a little bit of your background, talk about some of the things that you've done in your time, some of your hopes for the future, and then just go from there. So why don't you give me a little bit of info on your background?
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough to have been in Biddeford. I'm starting my 11th year as superintendent here in Biddeford. I came to Biddeford Schools after 8 years in Westbrook, and before that I was in the mid-region of Maine as a principal, and just a guy who moved down from Washington County and found a great home in Biddeford, Maine. Just really felt right from the get-go, and it's because of the great people here in Biddeford that it's all worked out well.
Yeah, that's great. There's a lot of things that have happened in that past 11 years, and I'm sure we'll get to all of them, but not only are you the superintendent of Biddeford, though, you're also the superintendent of Dayton Schools and Saco Schools, as I mentioned. So you've added, I should say, a couple more titles over that past 11 years.
Yeah. 8 years ago, we formed a great partnership with the community of Dayton to share central office services. And it's really been a good opportunity for Biddeford to kind of bring some revenue and tax rates and partnerships in to help keep the budget down, while for Dayton having the ability to work with a bit of a larger district and for their students being able to open up a little bit of school choice so that they have multiple communities they can choose to send their kids to.
And they get some efficiencies from doing that as well, right? They save some money. There's obviously benefit other than the school choice.
Yeah, there's just like a lot of, when you're buying a software program that schools need to manage, that's opportunity to share in those costs, or in leases of equipment. Hiring can go smoother when you're looking for two different districts. And there's times where you maybe need part of a position in one district and a small part in another position. And it would be totally impossible to find people to take it at part-time. But when you combine those together, you can find a really high-quality individual that makes a lot of sense for us.
Yeah. And 6-7 years later, Saco was added to the mix as well. I know that was a big deal for us going through that whole process. I know it's a big deal for you.
Yeah, I think that, as we know, I live in Saco and have kids in the school system, and, having the ability for that community to look towards us to form a partnership hopefully means that people think that we're making some really good steps here in Biddeford and looking at those greater efficiencies that can occur per district. I think that we've set up a model where everyone can keep their same identities and own identities when it makes sense, but when there's time to overlap to find those natural savings or efficiencies, we're able to do that. And I think your bigger savings come over time when you can really line up kind of some of those outside contracts so that you can go out to bid or lease all at one time together. Then you can really make some savings, and then taxpayers can either reap the savings, or we can really refocus that into our facilities and or positions.
Yeah.
and keep that money that's out serving students and not in a back office.
Definitely. Now, outside of the dollar and cents aspect of it, it's a pretty big deal to add Saco into the mix, right? That's just a big thing for our two communities that have been intertwined since the old days, to have this shared service. What has that meant for you?
Well, I think it is a situation where when people talk about things that can and cannot happen, Sometimes that was in the cannot happen. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to someone like me who's, Randy, you grew up here forever, and I'm someone from away that doesn't necessarily understand all of the history. And I grew up in an area where there was kind of a shared service, and that was over probably a 45-mile, section of Washington County. And it seems like when you're separated by a river and you're 2 miles apart and you think of yourself as a region, especially when you think about all of the development, you're stronger as a region than you are separate. And whether that's from our downtowns to home sales, we want people to be able to come here, and working together allows us to do a lot of positive things for kids in the community.
And you're right about that. In my business in the real estate mortgage industry, a lot of times we refer to the area as Biddeford Saco, right? Instead of just Biddeford or just Saco, it's Biddeford Saco. It's, I've been saying that for forever now. So it very much is a region. And I'm excited. It's one of these things that you've thought about in the past, right? Maybe when you first came on, and I don't know if there were some whispers about it, but all these years later, I think it's been a great fit so far, where we did a partial year last year, and this is the first full year, correct?
Yeah, we finished actually, we're actually further down the road than that, Randy.
Okay, year and a half.
We're starting on we're at like 16 to 18 months. We're almost done measuring ourselves like a baby and more getting into the years. But yeah, I think that I've been one that believes that sharing is the way to focus our finances into a place where it keeps money into your classrooms and into the buildings. Communities struggle, year after year, budgetarily wise, kind of keeping up. And I'm one that's a believer that you have to keep investing in capital. You have to keep investing in programs. And based off the structures that we have as a state with taxes and state subsidy, I'm just not sure regions can keep up long term.
So this is almost thinking ahead, right? Kind of putting ourselves in a position to be flexible in the future.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I'm also a believer that sometimes politicians can come in at the state level and try to dictate, as you can see with some of the RSU laws that came about 10 years ago and dictated some of the mergers. And at least this gives us an opportunity to discuss and talk about our own future versus somebody placing it on a map. And with enrollments declining all over the country and in Maine, I just feel like we need to try to be out ahead of everything that happens. And I'd rather us be looked at as a model than something that would be a forced march.
And why is declining student populations bad, right? That's bad for a specific reason when it comes to subsidies from the state, correct?
Yeah, your state subsidies are built on property valuation and the number of students you have based off a formula on the amount of staff you should have in a district. And so, as you lose 20 kids across an entire district, it doesn't result in a loss of staff because those kids are spread. And so all over the state of Maine, we see declining enrollments occur. All over the nation it occurs. And so you're getting less per kid because there's not as many of those in state dollars. At the same time, Randy, we know that the other half of the equation is property value. Yep. And in southern Maine, with property values going through the roof, that will also decrease what you would get from the state, because the state says if you have high property value, you should be able to pay more in taxes, which isn't necessarily true.
Yep.
But when those two things are moving in opposite directions, it sets up communities for a big challenge.
Yeah, and that's why it's more important that we have these relationships with Dayton, Saco, and Biddeford, or between the three, I should say, to help spread out those costs and put us in better as things could change in the future. So,
yeah.
And like you said, I think it can be a model for other regions or communities.
Certainly has possibilities. Certainly has its challenges.
Yeah,
but it wouldn't be any fun if it was easy.
So we're 16 months into that. I would consider that an accomplishment for the school district to build these relationships. What other accomplishments come to mind for you in that past 11 years?
I think there are certainly a lot of things that we are proud of here. Obviously, as I first came in, we were the high school was totally redone. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the passions or pieces that has interested me over time is really vocational education. Yep. Big believer. And to see the work that has happened in that building over 11 years. We're fortunate enough to have an outstanding leader in that building, in Paulette Bono, who's been in the community for a long time working. She's not only our vocational director, adult education director, but she was appointed by the governor to serve on the State Board of Education.
Mhm.
And the work that staff and that group of people have done, just from the, how we piecemealed bringing the building, giving it a facelift and bringing it back to life, to knowing that we are now over 400 students who in the area are accessing vocational programming, added a plumbing course. We've added many courses for students in technology and in healthcare. That's something I'm really proud of, because it's such an important part of our local communities, is having skilled trades out there.
Definitely.
It's
I know there's some kids that were able to find job placement right out of going to school at the Voc, if I remember correctly. Some of them.
Yeah. And it's our kids that are in our nursing programs that, have pretty much 100% acceptance rate into any of the nursing schools in Maine, or the kids who have gone from our engineering program to very successful college and career experiences going through Maine Maritime Academy.
Yep.
So it's a real bright spot, and it also has given us a real opportunity to work with the community in ways, and with like the Rotary Club. I mean,
Yeah.
Randy, I think about, some of the times where I first met you, and I think we were installing turf down at the Rotary House that we worked together.
That house is actually for sale again. I think of it every time I drive by. We were doing some yard work there. God, that was years ago.
And you were waiting for maybe, I think, your third child at that time.
Yeah.
Was coming. But you think about all of those opportunities that came through a lot of the work that happened at the vocational center.
Yeah, that whole place a lot of the work was
done by the students.
Yeah.
And Wayne Hapgood, as the instructor, led a lot of, and then just really excited about our opportunities in the future to expand. And, hopefully we really would like to have a culinary and hospitality program along with athletic training. And those are the next things they're in line for us.
Voc was available when I was in high school, but it's not something I utilized for whatever reason. I have regrets about not, and I'm sure things have changed since then too, but I don't know that a lot of people saw the value in it, or at least I didn't think so at the time, and I definitely regret that. So it's great to see it in the space that it is now, and hopefully people are taking more advantage of it. And there's kids coming from all other communities to use that school as well, which is great.
Yeah, and I think it was when I first got here, knowing that you had a high school that had been totally renovated, and then the building just across the walkway wasn't touched, was a really tough spot for us. And we've been able to pull that together, and that's been definitely a bright spot for us here in the last 10 years.
Now, another big project that you were involved in fairly early on was the Waterhouse field renovations. That was a pretty big deal at the time, right?
Yeah, that was definitely a lightning rod for us here in the community on that piece. I think.
How so though? So did people not want to put the money into that project? I forget. I remember doing some.
I think there was just a lot of things that came together. The pride that everybody had about how, hearing the stories of driving to Massachusetts to pick up the bleachers and putting them together, and getting the stories, whether it be from Ron Cody or Dennis Walton or Don Wilson or Jimmy Godbout, and all of those, like hearing about how much went into the other field, and then knowing that we had this big challenge presented to us, that the bleachers were getting in rough shape.
Yeah. It
just was like, ooh, what are we going to do about it? And no one quite dared to make that move. And when the bleachers got condemned and needed to shut down, boy, it really forced our hand.
Yeah.
And I will never forget the day that fairly early in the morning, Jim walked into my office, and Jim always comes into your office with his sweatshirt on, takes his sweatshirt off, and he looked at me and he said, "We're taking the bleachers down in 2 weekends." And I said, okay. And just Jim's ability to start that for our community and to bring everybody together, and then the work we did behind the scenes to put all the pieces in place so that we could finance that by refinancing the high school bond and putting the bleachers, and seeing all of the community donations come in.
Yeah. Remember the fundraiser we did on the boat for that in Casco Bay? A few $1,000.
Yeah. and all of those pieces coming together to make sure our kids had a place to play in Biddeford.
Mhm.
And I think the other piece that we did in that was pretty special is that became a very equitable playing surface for all of our sports.
Yeah, it's not just a football field anymore. You drive by anytime, there's girls soccer, field hockey, lacrosse for both, both genders, and just it's always being used, it seems like.
Yeah, it's used when you think about other communities coming to Biddeford to do things. It puts a little smile on your face. When a couple of years ago, Kennebunk and they're getting a new turf field now. When they called up a couple of years ago and they needed to use Waterhouse Field for a playoff game.
Yeah.
And they're playing all of their home games at Waterhouse this year while their field's under construction. Or when the NPA calls and says, hey, we want to have, the Southern Maine Championships for field hockey at Waterhouse Field. And, oh, wait, Biddeford now is going to be there because we have this tremendous program they're building.
Yeah.
It gives us a leg up.
Well, it's such a unique field, too. It's the only field that I can think of that doesn't have a track around it and has the bleachers so close to the field. It's a great place to watch any type of sporting event, right? Are there any fields that you can think of that are that way still? I mean, everything has a track around. I know Kennebunk's new field will have a track around it. Every school does. It makes sense. But
it was interesting, Randy, because Dennis and I visited a lot of places as we were going up to that. And the school committee, Karen Rule on the school committee was very involved in this piece. And I remember going to see the great complex they have at Massabesic. And Dennis and I brought a tape measure with us. And we figured, because they have the track in between and they have the steep bleachers like we do.
Yeah.
And our bleachers are 50 feet closer to the sideline than theirs.
Yeah.
And that's what it creates, that unbelievable experience on the home side at Waterhouse.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So, yeah, it's been great. My daughter's actually playing field hockey this year. All three of my daughters are playing field hockey, and we've been hitting the ball in the yard lately. And I'm like, we should go on the grass and hit on the grass. And she's like, field hockey's not played on grass, Dad. It's played on turf. And it's like, that's the way they think of things because, since the turf field has been installed. But I definitely don't think of it that way still. But it's a great field. I'm proud of it. And obviously you are too.
Yeah. I think about the 11 years that I've been here, going on 11 years, and still think that while there was a lot of emotion into the day that those bleachers came down, to witness 200 people being there one morning and businesses and people dropping stuff off, that was a great day. Yeah. That was a great day.
Yeah, something to be proud of for sure. And what has it been? 7-8 years? Something like that? It's 6 years maybe? Who knows?
Yeah, it's hard to count.
Yeah. But anyways, it looks just as good as ever. Other big things, something that happened in the past few weeks, and that was the decision to close JFK, which is going to lead to some reshuffling of the grades in our building, some additions. We talked after. It felt like one of the biggest things that I've certainly been involved in since I've been a member of the school committee.
Yeah.
And would you agree that it was for you too?
Yeah, I think that's a big decision because the condition of Kennedy School has been something that condition has been used to qualify other schools for state projects here. That's how the new middle school came. When I first came here to Biddeford, people talked about the condition of our school, and we just had a lot of different times where there's like false starts. And as a community prior to COVID, we were actually a couple of weeks before that touring all of our elementary facilities with the city council and talking about what would our plans look like. And with costs of construction and all those pieces that come together, you look at a situation where to renovate that school, you probably would be at $15 to $20 million funded locally. And now,
post-COVID. I know the costs are a little bit less than that. Before now, with the way everything is now,
it would be huge, and that would hit our local taxpayers. And then as we moved through the COVID process and brought 8th graders to the high school and shifted grade levels up one, we created a couple of scenarios where 8th graders could remain at the high school campus. Mm-hmm. The population of the high school is down. It's our best space. It's our newest space. And there's some really exciting programming things that we can do with 8th grade students, like greater access to vocational education, greater access to honors or advanced classes. And so we looked at all of those things, and it leaves us to ability to add an addition on the Biddeford Primary School that would allow our youngest students to have an experience where the first 4 years from pre-K through grade 2, where they'd be in one building, creating less transitions, allowing us to have better relationships with families and kids and get to know them. And hopefully, Randy, with all of the federal dollars that we received from the government through coronavirus relief that we've kind of saved, we can make all of this work without bringing any major costs to the local taxpayers.
Yeah, which is huge. So what does the grade shift look like now? Like you just said, K through second at primary, third and fourth at intermediate, 5, 6, 7 middle, 8 through 12 at the high school.
Correct. And so the 8th graders will remain, and we'll work on that project first of building some additional space. We're writing additional grants to hopefully build a second floor to a new wing that would be paid for through some vocational funding so that we can add some more vocational program. And then we'll start the process of working at the primary to add some additional classrooms, and hopefully within 2 years be in a situation where it will be Biddeford Primary School will be the location that our kids go for 4 years. And then part of that, really looking to expand our pre-K programming to either full day or to have more classrooms.
Yeah, which will be huge for families too. The two questions that I get a lot, or concerns, I should say. The first one is around 8th graders being intermingled with older kids, 11th graders, 12th graders. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think there are a couple of things. Is one, we can program differently, and that's some work that we have to do, is to think about how we program 8th and 9th together and where the location in the school is, while at the same time making sure it's not like segregation of 8th graders in one piece. I also think that things have changed over time, in the fact that while we may not want our 8th graders developmentally with seniors, and that's something that we can, avoid, you also look at the span of kiddos developmentally between being a 6th grader and being an 8th grader. And many times we forget that age spans, kids are all over the place. And sometimes I look at my own children and where they are developmentally versus the assistant superintendent's children, who are much different, and they're 11 months apart. And so we have work to do in all of those areas. And I think, what was interesting in the piece is that, when you talk to Scott Dakota at the middle school about what the last couple of years of having a 5 through 7 school, there's been some real feedback that it's allowed the ability of 7th graders to kind of not feel that pressure to grow up quicker, to, rise to that level, and the 6th graders to be like 8th graders. And so while there's plenty of work to do around that, I think it's just a shift. And then it really gets down to program of not only what can we do for our 8th graders, but what can we do for freshmen, and think about the opportunities that we build throughout their day and how they're placed throughout our high school.
Yep. The whole idea of the differences between a 6th grader and an 8th grader is very valid. And I think that that's something that people probably haven't taken into account when they think about some of their concerns around this. And, I think that that's good that there's some benefits on the other end of things with that too. So I should also say there was a 20 or 25 person committee that analyzed our options when it came to what we do here. And that was made up of school committee members, administration, parents, teachers, and the recommendation of that body was to do what we ultimately did, right?
Yeah, and we tried to put people on that committee who had the vested interest in Biddeford, whether it be from our staff who had kids in the school. And we talked about that because it was, again, probably one of the things that wasn't necessarily on the radar screen prior to COVID was having 8th graders at our high school. And maybe, we found that, kind of diamond in the rough situation of something positive coming out of this. And I think that we did. And at the same time, 10 years ago, our enrollment at the high school was over 850 kiddos.
And now is it 675?
And now we're going to be at like 675 next year. And the school was built for more than that. And so it's about us being ahead of the curve and trying to use our space wisely, our best space wisely, while also making sure that anything that we do construct, we have thoughts about the future. And I think it's just hard to think in Maine that there's going to be a situation where 300 or 400 kids move into the area immediately, I don't know where they'd be, Randy. I don't know where they'd go.
Yeah. Other question I get a lot too is, what are we going to do with JFK when it closes? And I think there's a misconception on that that you can probably speak to.
Yeah, so state law in municipalities, when a school closes, that reverts back to a city building. And so the city would, on the day it closes, they kind of the next day, they take control, for better or worse language. And then it becomes a community decision of what they would do with that. And, I think it's an interesting piece of property in our town. It's certainly, we know the value for our athletic complexes there of the parking and some of those spaces. And I think it will allow us to have some really good discussions about what maybe some of our youth programs or recreation department or things long-term look like. And so we can provide really good options for our kiddos.
It'll be interesting to see what comes of that space for sure. It's definitely a prominent location. Thousands and thousands of cars drive past it every day. So hopefully it's well used, but that's not something that we'll get to decide, or you'll get to decide.
Correct.
So that'll be left up to the city. I'm kind of backtracking it chronologically, but the other big thing since I've been a member of the school committee is obviously COVID. And I remember when I was appointed to the board and ran for re-election, there was no way that I would have expected my first year to encounter something so out of the ordinary. What has that past couple of years been like for you? I know you've worked so hard. Your whole team has worked their butt off, and it's been pretty crazy.
Well, I guess I'll never forget March 13th ever.
Same.
As the
Friday
day
the 13th.
when we I know that morning that we went to school, and of course superintendents had been talking, and I was taking my kids to school, and that was a morning they were bugging me to get, I think it was a Krispy Kreme donuts in Saco before school, and being in the drive-through and calling principals and saying, I just got an interesting feeling about today. We had kind of over the last 2 weeks before that kind of started to prep, like what happens if school closes for a week. And so, that just really changed everything, Randy. And, it provided us a lot of opportunity to look at the processes that you have in a school. Mm-hmm. And, to say to teachers who have been face to face with kiddos, and we were thinking we were going home for a week, to transition from being in front of kids to being, in front of a computer screen. And I think pretty quickly, as you began to see this, drag out within the first 3 or 4 weeks, we were like, how is this going to impact us? And in the team of administrators and teachers in this district, we started meeting outside as early as we could that first spring to say, how do we make sure that we get kiddos back into schools? And boy, we looked at a lot of space in Biddeford. We did some creative things, and I'm very proud of how our teachers and our parents and families reacted to a situation where we were able to bring, our pre-K through 8 students back pretty much full time that first year after that first spring.
I'll never forget that board meeting. We talk about what a big vote it was to close JFK and reshuffle those grades. But as far as a vote where I actually had chills as we were raising our hands to vote, because there was people that wanted their kids to go to school 2 days a week. There's people that wanted their kids to go to school 5 days a week. We had concerns from the teachers that we had to worry about. We had concerns from transportation that we had to worry about. And we ultimately came up with, I think the decision was to go 4 days a week, with Wednesday being a flex day. And I think we were one of the few schools that had an arrangement like that. But we knew that getting our kids into school was most important from a learning point of view. It's where some kids was their main source of food, safety, all that sort of stuff. So I thought that you guys did a great job with your recommendations, and I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did.
Yeah, I think everybody took a can-do attitude around here, and we did some really interesting things and worked with the state to make it happen. And because we were one of the few big districts that were able to pull that piece off. Mm-hmm. I think if I had to go back, Randy, and the biggest regret that I have during that time is I wish we could have done a better job of figuring out the high school piece. Mm-hmm. And it was just, it came down to lack of space.
It was 2 and 2, right? If I remember correctly. Yeah. 2 days for half and 2 days for the other half.
And there was just so much unknown. And unfortunately, we had to make some decisions about how do families with younger kids even survive this. with working
so
at
hard.
home, and we made some choices. I just wish we would have been able to I wish that we had more space so that we would have been able to get the high school kiddos here sooner. We came back later that spring, more full time, but that was the piece that I wish we had just done a little bit better, because our high school kids needed it as much as our elementary kids.
And I think we had high hopes for remote learning, right? We had all these plans in place for that. And what we found out is attendance was tough, or kids would be logged on with black screens. It was tough. But what are you going to do? It was such a unique time. I think that the administration and the district did their best. And, I think that's something to be proud of still.
And, you think about just how you use like a situation like this or a Zoom meeting. 2 years ago, this wasn't that common.
Oh, God, no.
And so there's that whole learning curve of just think about businesses who began just having their staff meetings online and the learning curve they had, or banking institutions that moved to so much remote. They had learning curves, and we were expected, our teachers, to do it with 20 students behind a screen with maybe 40% of those individuals who didn't have internet access. And we had to scramble to figure out how we provided those things and make sure a computer was at home. And then when you saw something behind a screen, how do you make sure that your guidance counselor or principal or social worker got involved to support that family? And it just opened up, a whole new world for us, and just so proud of how everybody handled it here, because they did the best that they possibly could do.
Same here. How difficult was it to deal with the mask stuff? I know that it was a pretty passionate topic. I know that our plan in our district was always to follow what the Maine Department of Education's guidance was, so the Maine CDC's guidance was. So for us, there wasn't really much of a decision. It was just if they recommended the masks, that's what we did. But it definitely felt a lot of pressure on that towards the end.
Yeah, towards the end, it got a whole lot tougher. And, I think everybody knows I was very supportive of masks early on and in the beginning. And it definitely got tougher, not only as a superintendent, but as an individual, when we'd be masking kids at school, and then you would go and see your kids play at, say, XL Sports on the weekend, and there was nothing. And it got tough seeing situations like that and trying to rationalize it in your own head, with your own family, in the office, and with kids. So I think another piece is that we, as superintendents and CDC and the DOE, those last 3 or 4 months really, really communicated well about how do we get to the point where masks can go away? What does that look like? What does the data look like? And it got really challenging at the end because people were tired.
It went away quicker than I thought it was going to go.
Yep.
I thought it was going to go away maybe over the course of the summer and come back that fall, which is this past school year, without anything. But, right? Do we have a full year without any masks? Yeah. Last school year was
partial.
Was last year when they came off in the early beginning of this year? God, man, past couple of years, I lose track of time. But yeah, so I would have thought that they'd come off this summertime and then maybe just have a normal fall. But the fact that they came off as early as they did was something that,
and it was, it was definitely a lot of work and communication that occurred. And, I think where I consider myself very fortunate as a superintendent is that our community overall was so respectful of those decisions. Mm-hmm. And while everybody, certainly had their point of view, we handled that about as good as a community as anybody around.
Yeah.
And that's just one of the things that I'm also pretty proud of, is that our community, sometimes when we have challenges, we do a nice job handling it.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So that brings me to moving forward. What things look like moving forward? What are some of the biggest challenges that you see for our community moving forward, if any, or things that you want to address?
I think probably one of the biggest challenges, Randy, that we have on the school department side is staffing, having enough staff to fill all positions, and that kind of works hand in hand with affordable housing and places for people to. That is definitely, this is the first in the last probably 12 to 18 months, this is the first time that it's really impacted probably us in southern Maine as much as it has. where people are relocating to other parts of the state because teaching salaries are not that much different and housing costs are much lower.
Yeah.
Plus the ability for people who have a spouse that maybe can work at home.
Mm-hmm.
That piece is a real challenge for us as we move into the future and think about how do we continue to staff at the same time knowing that colleges and universities aren't putting out as many teaching staff as they once did. That's a real challenge.
I thought this coming before COVID, though, right? I remember early on to being in the school committee, I think we were increasing the pay rate for custodians, bus drivers. Some of it might have coincided with COVID, but I think we saw pretty early on a need to increase wages to give people a reason to work for the Biddeford School Department versus McDonald's or whatever.
Yeah, and I think those were some steps that we've taken. That's only accelerated over the last 12 months.
Yeah.
I think that as school departments, we'll have to be as creative as possible to think about how we make sure there is housing options for staff in the future and how we fill these positions throughout. So that's probably one of the biggest challenges we have in the future. I think some of the exciting things that we have going is to think about how we've made some decisions about changing the structure of our school and how we don't see that as just moving from one place to the other, but really redesigning some of our programming to meet the needs of kiddos and meet the needs of families. Mm-hmm. Again, the decision to move JFK at some point when we have space built at BPS and allow a family to have 4 years of their child's first education in one building without those transitions. That's going to be a really good opportunity for us because you just get to know everybody.
Yep. And
when people are more attached to their schools and their communities, you think differently about whether you're going to move away or stay around. Mm-hmm. And we're hoping that the young families or the young people in town will, be involved in our schools, have their kids in our schools, and decide to stay in town mm-hmm. and grow the population back.
Definitely. One of the things that we were talking about, the past couple of weeks was just how it can be hard to communicate with the community sometimes since the Journal-Tribune. Yeah. And what a weird thing to think of. But I just had this same conversation with, I think, Dennis Walton the other week too, just what a loss that is not having a local newspaper when it comes to getting all the stuff that we've talked about on this conversation out to the general public. Do you find that to continue to be challenging?
Yeah, because I think that when I first came here, the local newspaper was a curse and a blessing all in one. Mm-hmm. And then now it's a situation where there are so many platforms to reach to that sometimes I think there's an overload. And at the same time, when you had the local newspaper, while you might not have always enjoyed the story, you knew that it was filled with facts and it was a way to get your message out. And we spend so much time making sure that people have correct information versus sometimes incorrect information that can happen via our social media platforms, or I heard this, or I heard that, and then sometimes people just read things that, when you're limited to say 140 characters on a tweet, mm-hmm. you may interpret something one way than I would, and you don't get an opportunity to provide a lot of the detail mm-hmm. that newspapers could do.
Do you think that that's hurt the community's relationship with the school department and maybe even the city government to any degree? The reason I ask is because Alan's email, the Biddeford Beat email that he puts out, had an interesting story about how, I think they passed the budget at the council meetings not that long ago, and how for the first time that he can remember there was no one there to comment on it or even complain for that matter. And it just made me wonder why that is. Is it people don't know about stuff, or people just don't care at this point? It's hard to say, I guess.
I think it's a combination of maybe you get this sense of feeling that you know more mm-hmm. because you have so much media hitting you all at one time. Mm-hmm. And again, I just think about some of the things that I enjoyed in life involved around. I remember as a teenager in college, how getting that Sunday Boston Globe to go read Peter Gammon's baseball section about what trades the Red Sox might make was that was the best Sunday morning ever. And
now that stuff is, put out online the moment that it's thought of, and everyone has.
Yeah, I I go to TweetDeck now and hashtag Red Sox rumors or Patriots rumors, and there's so much there that it's every 2 seconds. And, do you feel like you're more in the know or less in the know? And
yeah, I guess I would say that I feel more in the know, right? I mean, there's all that information that's right at your fingertips. I guess maybe there's so much that just people are kind of caught up in a million other things, and the stuff that's going on with the school or stuff that's going on with the city is more in the background at this point. And maybe that changes at some point. I know that one thing I've experienced over the past few years is just everyone seems to have an opinion on things, but no one really ultimately gets involved, right? Like, everyone had a thought on COVID and the mask stuff, but there was only a handful of parents on a few calls that would actually call into our meetings. And, to hear that no one goes to these city council meetings when the budget's being passed, and it just makes me wonder why that is. And I just would rather be part of the solution than just complain people all the time.
And I think also, Randy, sometimes when you see things online that you say to yourself, you know what, I'd like to wade into that topic. And then you say to yourself, no,
yeah,
because I don't want to spend the next 3 hours doing this at home.
All riled up.
And it's not good for any of us. I also think that, life is way busier than it used to be 10 years ago, too. I mean, our kids never sit still. We're always on the go. You got to do this. You be there. It's hard.
It's absolutely nuts. So, I want to get to some non-school related stuff in a second, but just want to say thank you for the efforts over the past few years that I've been on the committee, as well as your whole tenure at Biddeford. I think it's been a good run, and look forward to everything that we got going on in the years to come. So,
yeah, me too.
So,
it's a great place.
Now, I got to ask you, you go to a lot of sporting events.
I do.
What's up with that? Is season tickets everywhere, or is that just your thing? Just traveling around, Super Bowls, playoffs, season tickets here and there?
So prior to children and marriage, I enjoyed going to sporting events, and it just is a great escape. And I kind of joke with my friends when we see things and you say, well, is that on the list? Is that on the list of things that you have to witness? And going to something like a Super Bowl or a Red Sox World Series or a Celtics, those are on the list. And so, when I go down in the basement or I look back, I say, you know what? There are things that I wanted to see, like getting the opportunity before I came to Biddeford of going to the Masters.
You've been to the Masters? No kidding.
I've been to the Masters.
How did that work out? Someone you know, or did you win a lottery? Or
so I knew somebody who I jokingly said to them, if a spot ever opens up, I'm in. And I'll half joking.
Yeah.
And I was with my family. I think we had just had maybe just had Kennedy, or Colby was young, and the guy gave me a call and said, hey, Jeremy, 2 spots open. You have to take them both. You have to find somebody, and you've got 1 hour. And I was like, okay.
Yep.
And that was one that I said yes to. And what was really interesting about that entire trip is you go to the Masters and you see, we were there on Thursday and Friday, and so you see the ceremonial tee off with Arnold Palmer and Hogan and I can't remember who else was there, Paul Hogan and who else the third one was, and it's just
Jack,
amazing.
Was it Jack?
It might be, yeah, probably Jack. I think it was Jack, and it was great. And when you're in the Masters, it's all about memory because they don't allow cell phones in.
Best thing ever.
And so you're there, you're focused on it. And on day number 2, I sat next to a lady who had been to like 50 some odd straight Masters.
Wow.
And I was in the application process of applying. I think I'd had one interview to come to Biddeford. And when I started talking to the lady all morning, by the end of the conversation, she had explained to me that she had a daughter that taught home ec at the middle school in Biddeford. And so it's like this really cool experience where and then we start talking about Maine and stuff, and it's just a great experience. And I love going to those events, and there's a few things on the list that I've got to get to.
Super Bowls.
2.
Any of them Patriots Super Bowls? I forget.
Both of them Patriots.
And a Super Bowl? Were you there for that one?
I was at 28-3.
Okay, yeah,
We were there. I was at that one, really trying to think about how I explained to Suzanne that I just saw the Patriots blown out and how much money I may have spent on that ticket.
Yeah.
And then it worked out well. And then I went to the one against the Rams,
which was fun.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Oh, man, I will make it to a Super Bowl at some point, but I am just bummed that I didn't get a chance to see Brady on the Pats in the Super Bowl. So at this point, it's that ship has sailed. But good for you for seeing one of the best games ever, and then his last Super Bowl in New England.
Yeah, those are fun, and be interesting to go to one without the Patriots in it, just because you're kind of, when you're there, you're Patriots fan. Yeah. It'd be interesting to see all the other things that go along with it.
That first half of the 28-3 game was one of the most miserable first halves of football I ever have watched before. So as a fan in the stands, I would be miserable. I'd be like, this is awful. And you're thinking about the money and what a waste it is, as opposed to going to just a game where you don't care quite as much. You can really just enjoy yourself.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot of stressors going through your mind on that piece. So, but great. They're just great experiences.
And then Celtics this past year, and probably, I don't know if you went 2007 or not.
Yeah. I've had Celtics season tickets for a long time, and seeing those and seeing the Bruins, and had an opportunity in 2007 to go to a couple of the Red Sox World Series, and they're all fun, and I don't know what's next. Ryder Cup's really fun. Ryder Cups are great.
So I had a buddy that went to Ryder Cup in Wisconsin this past year. It's going to be fun, but with everything with the new Live Tour, it's like, there's going to be a lot of guys that you would want to be playing in the Ryder Cup that won't be there. I mean, it should be fun either way, but it definitely seems like it's going to be different this next time around.
Yeah, I would actually, one of the other, I enjoy horse racing too, going to horse racing events.
Derby?
And so I've been to the Kentucky Derby, which is outstanding, even though it rained all day. But I got to go and see, I saw American Pharoah win the Triple Crown.
At Belmont Stakes?
At Belmont.
Mm-hmm.
And that was from start to finish, watching that horse run that track, and knowing that by pretty much halfway through that there was no catching that horse. And you were like, I am seeing history. And then to watch, Randy, how quickly they put up like their little jockey number of Pharoah of Triple Crown winners. Like, it was there within seconds. Yeah. That was amazing. Yeah. That was a cool experience, those last 20 seconds of that race.
Smart move to skip Preakness. I don't know that you have any interest in that, but I've been before. It's more of a
I've been there.
Oh yeah, okay. It was a fun time, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't seem like the classiest place compared to Kentucky Derby, or I don't know.
That was many, many years ago when we did that one, but that's not like the Derby or the Belmont.
Yeah. So what do you think about the Pats this year? How are you feeling? You excited or what?
I'm excited to watch football right now versus watching the Red Sox.
Yeah, true.
So at least tonight we'll get a taste of it. I guess I have to say, interesting to see what that offense is going to be like.
Me too. Another year 2 of Max should be interesting, but it's still weird, man. I still haven't gotten over Brady being on Tampa. I can't believe it, But
I still hope that some point throughout the year I get a chance to see Tampa play one more time.
Did you go to the Tampa New England game last year? Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and I did too, and I was glad to have gone, but man, such a weird.
It's a breakup that didn't need to happen.
It really didn't. Still bummed. And I'm glad I got a chance to see Brady play this season too, so I'll enjoy that. Last thing, should the Celtics trade for Kevin Durant?
No.
Absolutely not. No.
Unless it's if they're keeping Jalen and Tatum,
which is it's impossible to keep those guys and still get him. Jalen's got to go if they're going to trade for him. But I don't like KD, and I like the guys that they added: the Brogdon addition, Gallinari addition.
I love a lot that they did this year, and boy, that was an exciting 4th of July when Tom Brady's touring him around the Hamptons back. What's that? That and you're thinking, oh, Al Horford's coming, maybe he is going to come, but now it just the demanding of a trade, like what's to say that we're not going to be in the same boat like one season after this with him saying I want out.
Yeah, I mean, how old is he? 34, 35?
He's 34.
Yeah.
He's got 4 years left, and
some bad
Jaylen
injuries.
Brown, 25.
I just hate how Jalen's name's always in every trade rumor, and that seems to be something that he's very aware of. You know, so I don't want him to get disgruntled and want out, but I don't know, I'd rather ride that out than get KD, who seems to be kind of a cancer to some degree. And honestly, he choked last year in the playoffs.
I mean, we totally shut him down. Jalen can be so frustrating at times for me to watch because it's like he's unbelievable. Or he's bouncing the ball off his foot.
He's such an athlete. I mean, he can finish around the hoop. He's strong. He can shoot now, but he cannot dribble. When he's dribbling the ball, that's pretty much the last thing I want to see when the Celtics are on.
I think that if we're healthy and we have a healthy Robert Williams, that is the key to that team being successful and getting back next year.
Well, hey, football in a month, basketball in, 2.5 months. So I don't want to rush it, man. I'm going to enjoy the last few weeks of the summertime before all that stuff gets going.
Exactly.
So, well, all right. Well, let's just call it good there. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me, Randy. I appreciate it.
All right, pal. Have a good one.
All right. Take care. See ya. Bye.